You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 22nd of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, Joe Biden will not stand for re-election. But who will? We'll be live in Washington to discuss the future of America. We'll also look how the process of finding a successor will be managed. Is this Kamala Harris's moment?
I'm endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris because she's ready to step up, bring our party together, go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, and win in November.
Elizabeth Warren certainly seems to think so. We'll get the latest from Kenya as the president promises a broad-based government and protesters take their fight to the IMF in Washington. We'll examine how the news from the US has been covered in the day's papers, and we'll have a look at the impact on the business world. Plus,
if you ask any diver, for example, it's completely addicting. You know, that feeling when you're free in the free dimension, and there's something more than just technicity.
We'll meet a Swiss adventurer. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. Joe Biden, the US president, has announced he will not seek re-election. Well, we're going to cross straight to our US editor, Chris Lord, in Los Angeles, and journalist H.J. Mai in Washington, D.C., to get the details on this. Chris, how and when did he make this announcement?
So around lunchtime, Delaware time on Sunday, Joe Biden took to Twitter and put out a statement on there announcing that he was choosing to step aside. Now, what we do understand is that on Saturday evening, he brought together his top team of advisors who laid out the polls for him and said, the way it stands, you're just simply not going to win against Donald Trump. And then he took some time, he took Sunday morning, and really the report is that just a few minutes actually before he went ahead and put that statement out. He then told the next tier of his team. So it's quite a few people, I think, maybe not taken aback or by surprise, but I think the speed, once he'd made his decision on Sunday morning, with which that happened really, really fast. Now we've got a moment where he's immediately, as part of his statement, endorsed Kamala Harris, the vice president of the US, to take over the ticket, to pick up the baton and run with it. And now we're in this extremely uncharted territory of working out exactly who is going to be the Democratic ticket going into this election in November.
Well, exactly. I mean, H.J. Biden did say in his letter to the American people, today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. But does that necessarily mean that she will be the nominee?
I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that she will be the nominee in the end, but I mean, it has some weight, obviously. And, you know, she's the logical successor here as the vice president. And, a lot of people who have been mentioned as also potential, contenders for the nomination have already dropped out and supported Harris. We've already heard from Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who has supported the vice president. The same is true from California Governor Gavin Newsom. And, a lot of influential politicians on the Hill have already, thrown their weight behind the vice president. So while it's not guaranteed, and we will see what the next couple of weeks bring, she's definitely the front runner and the clear leader when it comes to win the Democratic nomination.
Chris, if she does run, who would be her running mate?
This is the big question. And I think while the nomination itself is maybe not a foregone conclusion, but not far away, the question of her VP, I think, is going to be very important. So there's a few front runners that we can talk about at this stage. HJ just mentioned Gretchen Whitmer up there in Michigan, also has been floated. She's the governor of Michigan. Also been floated is Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania. Again, you got what you have there is two governors of key swing states of this 2024 election, both of them in, as it gets called, America's heartland, taking in elements of old manufacturing centers, Rust Belt areas, places where, in some respects, the J.D. Vance on the Republican side speaks to, which is those communities that maybe used to have very vibrant industrial backbones running through them, of economic backbones, and that maybe have been taken away. So I think she will want that ballast of somebody coming from America's heartland. There's also been floated, of course, Gavin Newsom as a potential VP from here in California, and others as well. I think that we've got to be realistic here, that ultimately the campaign now is going to have to do a great deal of work to reorient and reposition VP Kamala Harris as a viable president and commander-in-chief. And by that, what I mean is, throughout this administration, she's been, in so many cases, left a little bit in the shadows and not been out there as much as really so many people observing the administration say she should have been. The country needs to be reintroduced to her. She's already out on the campaign trail, but she's going to need a VP who can speak to very different constituents than her own. As I say, she is from California. She was the Attorney General here in California at one point, and also a senator as well. So she's going to need to find somebody, I think, and that's probably where this lands, coming from a heartland seat. But at the moment, that is all yet to become. Generally speaking, it doesn't really hit until the DNC that would be determined. But they may decide. The DNC, of course, being the convention next month, they may decide to announce that a little bit earlier and basically get them both out as soon as possible on that ticket.
And HJ, I wonder what leading Democrats are saying about Biden's decision and how much tension and division there's been within the party leading up to the announcement.
So the reaction, has been universally that, Democrats have really been, paying tribute and praising the president's, life as a public servant. He's been in the public light for the past, half century, really. First as a U.S. senator, then as a vice president, and obviously the past 4 years now as president. There has been really, support across the board now of this decision. I think leading up to this, it has really divided the party. Sunday morning, before the president actually made the decision, we've seen a couple more Democrats, publicly speak out against him and ask him to step down. And at the end, I think the number was in the low 30s. We had, over 24 House members, at least 5 senators, who have called on the sitting president to not run again. And that's obviously unprecedented. You have to go back to 1968, the last time that a sitting or incumbent decided to withdraw from the race with Lyndon B. Johnson back then. And so, while everybody is now, full of praise for the work that the president has done the past 4 years, calling him a true patriot, somebody who saved democracy after defeating Donald Trump back in 2020. There has clearly been some division. And I think it's now important for Democrats, if they really want to beat the Republicans and Donald Trump in November, to really unite behind, someone, whether that's the vice president, Kamala Harris, or somebody else. But it's really important for the party to find that person, unite, and, really start campaigning on the issues that, they can win independent voters over the next, what is now less than 4 months until Election Day.
So let's have a look at the Republican reaction. Just this weekend, this is what Donald Trump had to say about Harris.
From the moment we take back the White House from crooked Joe Biden and Kamala, I call her Laughing Kamala. You ever watch her laugh? She's crazy. You can tell a lot by a laugh. No, she's crazy. She's nuts. She's not as crazy as Nancy Pelosi, crazy Nancy.
Chris, have we had any reaction from the Republicans since the news dropped? And what does this mean for their campaign?
Look, I think they've put so much ire and focus onto Joe Biden that in a way, even though everybody saw this coming down the track, to get those lines landing about Kamala that they will want to do and need to do to kind of get the edge on her, there's still a little bit of work on their side to be done. I think that the easy shot that they're going to be able to take is on the border, the southern border. When Kamala, early on in the administration, she was handed what many regarded as a kind of poisoned chalice to try and take that notoriously porous southern border and try and fix relations with Mexico to stop people coming over it illegally. Of course, the key line that's coming out of the Republicans and from the convention last week was that, the so-called invasion over the southern border, they're going to really pin that on her, which is a key concern, I think, for a lot of voters. I think there is an element, what we do have to say, and just adding on what HJ was just saying a second ago, the cracks within the Democrat Party are not just going to be papered over by the arrival of Kamala Harris. I mean, the key, Trump there mentions Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it's no secret that, first of all, Biden is frustrated that Pelosi was one of the key voices really advising him and telling him, look, the jig is up. You need to consider and look at these polls and say that you're not, acknowledge that you're not going to win. And similarly, frustration with his old boss, Barack Obama, who it's understood was also raising concerns that Biden couldn't win if he went up against Trump again this year. Neither of those people, key grandees of the Democrat Party, neither of them have endorsed Kamala Harris. And while there is a huge groundswell, naturally, of support going behind her over the last 24 hours since Biden made the announcement, of course that's going to happen. But privately, there are lots and lots of people within the Democrats who feel concerned that similarly, while yes, there are certain states where she does better than Trump by a very small margin, in many places she really polls the same as Biden. And there are still many constituents very wary of what kind of leader she might be and whether she's got the chops to run the country in the way that many want to see it go. So I think that the Republicans are going to now, I think, dive on her very strongly in their messaging. But the Democrats also need to fix the House and come together and make sure everybody agrees that this is the right person to run this campaign.
And finally, HJ, many people are saying if Biden can't or won't run for president, he should resign immediately. I wonder if you could just unpick that argument for us.
Yeah, I think the first one who brought that up, yesterday after the president made the announcement that he would drop out, was Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, who basically said, if you're unfit to run for the presidency, you're clearly unfit to, serve as president, and you should resign immediately. That's definitely a talking point among Republicans. As long as we don't hear any, mental incapacity or that he's dealing with a serious health issue, I really don't think that this is gaining any traction. Once again, this is not the first time that a president has withdrawn or a sitting president has withdrawn from a re-election campaign. Over the past 3 weeks since President Biden's poor debate performance against, the former president, Donald Trump, this groundswell, this infighting within the Democratic Party, the writing was on the wall. And so I think this is just, one way of spinning this announcement, and Republicans hope to gain some traction there. But I don't think this is going anywhere. Once again, as long as we don't hear anything that there's really something that the American public should be concerned about, and that, the president is in office while dealing with a serious health issue, there shouldn't be any reason why he can't fulfill his term until, next January.
HJ Mai and Chris Lord, thank you both very much. This is The Globalist. Now let's cross to Mark Edelman, who's a long-standing campaign and communications consultant to US Democrats. Mark, was this a surprise?
I don't think it was as much of a surprise, certainly in the last 3 weeks since the debate as to when it was going to happen. The polling data has been pretty much in consensus that the president was losing ground in not only the swing states that are must win, but that other states, which pretty much have been safely in the Democratic column for many, many years now, were all of a sudden becoming up for grabs.
So, we know now that Biden has endorsed Harris, but we don't know if his wishes will be respected. The Washington Post ran a big piece yesterday on just how the selection process might work. Can you explain how this will now unfold?
Well, I can't really get into the intricacies of how delegates vote and the rules committee and sort of the ongoings and ingoings of the Democratic convention per se. But what I would say is that, basically the Democratic establishment fell in line yesterday afternoon following the president's endorsement, where you had a number of the people I know that was referenced with your guest earlier, who might have been contenders for the presidency, folks like Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, that, endorsed her. And so there is sort of this wave that has come over since the president's announcement yesterday, where we are now, sort of looking at what a Kamala Harris nomination is going to just look like. And so the mechanisms of how the delegates will vote and the rules committee and all the parliamentary procedure, which are very important to a process in this, but you sort of know the outcome before the process starts now.
Will Biden still be campaigning, and is the focus of the campaign likely to change? For instance, going in more heavily on abortion, something we know that Harris is interested in.
Yes. Well, I assume you will see the president very often and out there making the case against Donald Trump and making the case for Kamala Harris. And the abortion issue, which I know you and I spoke about when I was in your studio in London in March, remains and continues to be a galvanizing issue for Democrats. This idea that, in the last 2 years since the reversal of Roe v. Wade, we have 27 states where it is illegal to have an abortion in this country. That is directly connected to President Trump appointing 3 conservative and I would say out of step with the American people Supreme Court justices that returned the right to have an abortion to the states, where you have seen it has been outlawed now, exponentially. And this was something that if you watched any of the Republican convention last week, this idea that it's a states issue, it should be about the states. This is not a country, and we had talked about this again earlier, that you don't take rights away from people, and that is something that we have seen month after month after month since the right to choose was stripped away from the federal courts.
I want to get some kind of sense of what Democrats are saying, how they've reacted to the news. Here's Senator Richard Blumenthal speaking after the news dropped.
President Biden has been one of the greatest, most courageous, and consequential presidents of American history. And he has helped to cement his legacy of leadership and vision with this decision.
Mark, I wonder if that's a widely echoed view. Is there recognition of really what a sacrifice Biden's made for the country and what he's done during his presidency?
I think I would echo Senator Blumenthal's comments. People widely have come out and really seen this as a sacrifice that the president made, which you could have never imagined Donald Trump ever making. What Joe Biden has done for this country over his 3.5-year administration, reckons back to the days of the Great Society under President Johnson and the New Deal under President Roosevelt. And the patriotism that I think that Joe Biden has really made this about is about this country, about what the future of this country is going to look like, and really about what this election is about. It's not about Joe Biden. It's not even really about Kamala Harris. It's about, in my opinion, and many, many Americans, that we cannot live through a Donald Trump term again. And Joe Biden's act today was selfless, and it really will be looked at in the history books as one of the more selfless acts that, an American leader, I think, has shown themselves to be in real time.
And exactly as you say, this is not something we could ever expect from Donald Trump, who is, in fact, exactly the opposite. I do wonder, though, if Americans have lost trust in the Democrats. I mean, is there a sense that the party was hiding how bad this situation really was? They've known for a while that Biden really shouldn't stand, and yet they've been going along with this fact that here is our next president. Are they to be trusted?
Believe me, the Democrats, if you look at what Joe Biden campaigned on and promised when he ran in 2020, we have seen so much of that come to fruition. And when you look at Donald Trump and you look at everything he says, which makes no sense, can never be counted on, and seems to be the most at odds with what the truth is at all times, there is no doubt in my mind that the Democratic Party is at the core of what at least Americans believe want to do the best for them. And it's not to say that we get it right every single day, but this is a party that I think Joe Biden has led us to, that Americans, I think, will look at and go, who's the guys who's gonna tell me the good news and the bad news? It's us. It's not the world of Donald Trump.
Mark, I know a number of donors threatened to pull their funding if Biden stayed on the ticket. I understand there's been a flood of money coming in since this announcement.
That's correct. I saw something like $46 million tonight, and that isn't big dollar money. That is low dollar, grassroots kind of money. And what happened today, or tomorrow or yesterday, I guess, I don't even know what time zone I'm in, but the enthusiasm and the energy that was really unleashed with this idea that Democrats can win in November. If you saw nothing but Donald Trump's speech or even part of it last week at the Republican convention, he is a beatable guy. These are ideas that they have put forth that are not in the mainstream of America. And so I think what you saw tonight was a true affirmation that the Democrats not only have a real chance to win in November, but if they can do it on their terms and make this election about what it is, which will be a binary choice in November. And I should say, a lot of people start voting much earlier in this country, the end of September in some states. It really will come down to what is at stake, what was lost during the Trump years, what was gained during the Biden administration, and what Democrats are going to be fighting for every single day between now and the election and going forward after we win in January. Well, I should say win in November and get inaugurated in January.
Mark Edelman, thank you very much indeed. Now, still to come on the programme.
I'm Alexis Self, Monocle's foreign editor, and I will bring you international reaction to Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from the presidential race.
We'll be joined by Lex later in the programme, and we'll also check how markets are reacting to the news too. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 8:24 in Zurich, 7:24 here in London, and we'll continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Latika Burke, who's a journalist and an expert on geopolitics. Good morning to you, Latika.
Good morning, Georgina.
Now, you were in with me on Saturday. We were discussing how this news might happen. It indeed has. Looking across the world's papers, they are strictly divided by time zone. Of course, in countries where it hadn't happened yet, when they went to press, nothing about Biden. Every other newspaper in the world, you don't need to be able to speak the language. You can tell by the pictures and the word Biden screaming out from all the front pages. This is internationally important.
Yes, there's really no other story to be looking at if you are scanning across the papers today. And I think it's one of those cases where actually being in not the country of the story's origin is the best place to be. Australia is a great example. They've got all day to think about how they're going to depict this. But there's some cracking newspaper front pages out today. The New York Post has just got a picture of Biden departing through the door saying the end. I think that's very evocative. The only really, I guess, a bit snipey one is the Daily Star, which is, it's that tone, and they say, Sleepy Joe, it's time for a nap, Pres heading off to bed after endless cock-ups. But that's really not the tone of the mainstream press all around the world. I mean, most are calling it very straight. The Daily Mail, for example, Biden out, Kamala in. And really that's the nutshell of the question that Biden's decision leaves us with. Who is actually going to be on that ticket come November? Liberation in Paris says by Biden, hi Harris in English, which is quite interesting. And there's a nice visual of Biden looking to the left and Kamala looking to the right, and she's smiling and Biden's not. And then we have probably my favourite out of all of them, which is Time magazine has issued a new cover. It's just the red cover. It's really, really evocative. Black time. And then you just have half of Joe Biden's full figure walking off the edge of the page. So you just see his leg and his back. You don't even see his head in this. And Kamala very confidently striding onto the front page from the left-hand side. It's a full figure of her in action. And I think that's really captured the kind of zeitgeist. But of course, Georgina, as you've been covering all morning, who knows who will be VP? Is it going to be Kamala? I think the other thing that's being captured across all the papers is just what I think is the sincere gratitude to Biden being expressed by all these leaders around the free world who have such a stake in what the American people decide in November. And so you see this from New Zealand to the Middle East, to Australia, to the UK, just a very almost reverent thank you, President Biden, for your service. And it really does strike me that I'm not massively sure that if that was Donald Trump quitting, you would have such a warmth and a sincerity of grace in the way that everyone is treating Biden. It is an overwhelming sense of the guy is gone, he's done the right thing, and we actually thank you for doing a very good job. And that's the legacy that Biden should have been thinking about leaving, of course, years before now.
The Toronto Star really voices what we're all thinking. Biden's retreat upends election battle. It could be a complete upending of it, or Kamala Harris could just take over and this carries on quite smoothly. But there is the chance, of course, that there will be a completely different team running.
Yes, and that's really what this move does. It removes that block and it removes that sense of inevitability. And I think most would kind of be watching the US election thinking it's a bit of a slow motion car crash in action as you see the Democrats putting and pretending that Joe Biden was okay to run for another 4 years. Everyone could see that the American people, when faced with that prospect, might not turn out, or they might be forced into accepting the other guy, which is Donald Trump. Now, the overwhelming sense of the coverage today is there's a chance. There's a chance because Donald Trump, we know, is beatable. Biden beat him last time. We know there are huge risks with his MAGA style and he's doubling down on the MAGA style by choosing J.D. Vance as his vice president and not somebody who could have appealed to different sorts of groups of voters. We know that those are huge risks and we know that they can be battled. We know that they can be defeated. But Biden was clearly not the guy to do it. Who is the man or woman to do it? This is, of course, going to be the subject of many newspaper reviews between you and me, Georgina, over the next few weeks. Because is it Kamala? Is it Michelle Obama? Is it somebody else? Who's going to be VP?
Shapiro, possibly.
Correct. And then you start opening up, well, does Gavin Newsom want it? Do these people Pete Buttigieg, who've always harboured presidential ambitions? Are they going to run now when their party needs them to step up, or are they going to wait when Trump is out of the picture and they have a clearer path?
It's also very interesting to look at the political leanings of papers and how that influences what they're saying about this. As you point out, of course, Australian papers aren't out yet with that, but there is some coverage online. And so we have here from I think this is the Sydney Morning Post. So a piece in the Telegraph tells us, as Australia woke up to the latest dramatic twist in the US presidential race, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese commended Mr. Biden's leadership and ongoing service. But Joe Biden steps down, how the US president's inner circle blew it, said one headline in the Sydney Morning Herald's homepage. And of course, that is a Murdoch-owned paper.
So the Herald is not, but then the next one is the Australian. And I think this is quite interesting because this has been very ill-studied or understudied. The dynamic between Rupert Murdoch and the Republican Party has long been fraying under Trump. Trump has preferred his own sorts of distribution methods on his media. And actually in choosing J.D. Vance showed a huge split between MAGA-land and Murdoch. Now, it used to be the case, Georgina, that you did have to kiss the Murdoch ring if you wanted to rule a country, whether it was Britain, whether it was Australia, or whether it was the United States. And we see that weakening. And the Murdoch press has been very scathing of the Biden administration. But they're probably not Robinson Crusoe there. I mean, in the last few weeks, Georgina, it's been pretty clear to most, regardless of your political leanings, that Biden was just simply not literally physically up for the job.
I mean, and this is a question I addressed with our guests earlier. Are the Democrats now guilty of misleading the public?
Well, this is the big case against Kamala Harris, and expect this to be the narrative over the next few weeks. Did Kamala Harris engage in the cover-up and the concealing of Joe Biden's condition? That, if you are trying to take out Kamala Harris as the VP or now the presidential nominee, that is going to be a devastating argument to mount. Now, it could be the case that once Biden is off the scene, this might just move on because, as your earlier guest was discussing, the criticality here now for the Democrats is to make this about Trump. You know, this has to be an election about, do you want what Trump, what MAGA, and what MAGA might do for the next 4 years? That's really the question.
And of course, Trump now becomes the oldest person ever to stand for office.
Well, it's quite a different dynamic when you have a 79-year-old running against somebody who might be in their 50s or 60s. Suddenly you have a very different sort of dynamic and contest opening up, don't you?
Latika, thank you very much indeed. Much to discuss and digest from this morning's papers. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Israel said it shot down a missile launched from Yemen on Sunday, and the Yemeni Houthi movement said it had fired several missiles at the Israeli city of Eilat after Israel's first public strike against the Iran-aligned group a day earlier. The Houthis have launched missiles and drones at Israel and disrupted global trade through the Red Sea in response to Israel's assault on Gaza, further destabilising the Middle East as war in the Palestinian enclave rages on after 9 months. Taiwan started its annual Han-Kuang War Games today, which this year aim to be as close as possible to actual combat, with no script and simulating how to repel a Chinese attack. China, which views democratically governed Taiwan as its territory, has been staging regular exercises around the island for 4 years to pressure Taipei to accept Beijing's claim of sovereignty, despite Taiwan's strong objections. And Ukraine needs long-range weapons to protect its cities and troops on the front line from Russian bombs and drones, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday after a massive overnight drone and missile attack. Russia launched its 5th drone attack on Kyiv in 2 weeks overnight, with Ukraine's air defence systems destroying all the air weapons before they reached the capital, Ukraine's military said. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's It's 9:34 in Nairobi, 8:34 in Zurich. And we go to Kenya now, where protests against a new finance bill began on June the 18th, as mainly young people took to the streets, stating they were leaderless and tribeless in their calls for change, accountability and good governance. At least 50 people have died since the protests started, and more than 400 others have been injured. But the President, William Ruto, calmed the situation by announcing a reversal of the higher taxes that he was seeking to implement and by firing most of his cabinet. He stated he wanted a broad-based government. Well, here to bring us up to speed is Navina Couture, who's Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. Navina, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. What does Ruto mean by a broad-based government, and what has he done to implement this?
I think what he really means by a broad-based government is currently unclear. What he has done is he has brought in new ministers, but retained 6 of the original ministers, including the Interior Minister and the Defense Minister. And this has caused a lot of irritation on the side of the protesters, who are especially seeing the Interior Ministry responsible for the killings of the protesters that you have just mentioned.
And so has there been anger on the street?
Yes, we're expecting more protests tomorrow. The street or the protesters who have been organizing these events have reacted and said that they don't want ministers to be recycled. They want the issues that they have been talking about, corruption, police violence, to be addressed. So I think we have to expect more protests tomorrow. And I think it's really important to remember that this is a protest movement carried by a lot of young Kenyans, but also by the Kenyan middle class, by Kenyan civil society organizations like the Kenyan Law Society. And the Kenyan Law Society has also called on the president to follow due process in investigating these killings. So I don't think Mr. Ruto has been able to calm the sentiment on the streets at all.
So what's interesting too is a court has suspended the police ban on demonstrations. They say citizens do have a right to protest.
Exactly. I think it's a very interesting observation that the justice system in Kenya has largely supported this protest movement. It has supported the right to assembly, the right to protest. It has ruled against Mr. Ruto's decision to send the military onto the streets. It has upheld the right to protest and for protests not to be disbanded. So Mr. Ruto and the executive are in a way, to a certain extent, isolated because the courts have undone a lot of the decisions he has taken in order to break the resistance.
So we also understand that Kenyans living in the United States have taken protests to the International Monetary Fund, to the IMF headquarters in Washington. They've castigated the IMF for giving loans to the Kenyan government with little or no accountability structures to ensure that the funds are used properly. They say that a significant chunk ends up stolen by the government and that there's a huge corruption around this. And I wonder if there's been any official reaction from the IMF on its position on funding Kenya and if it's going to continue to do so.
The IMF has always stressed that it doesn't actually dictate how a country should tax its citizens, how a country should use the funds. It insists that there is some oversight as to how these funds are used. But obviously, these are not just allegations coming from protesters. This has been established that there is widespread corruption, that the money, the US dollars that are taken as loans or taken as debt that eventually need to be paid back have not been used in the country, have not been used for the purposes that they were assigned for, but have been siphoned off, often abroad. And this is one of the reasons why these protests started, because people are saying that they're not willing to fund the corruption and to fund the graft in the government, and they don't understand or they don't accept that people with normal incomes have to then basically repay debt that was never invested in the public space in the first place.
Do you think that Ruto can keep a lid on this? Will it spiral out of control?
I mean, it has been sort of coming and going. I think it will be very important for him to navigate the cabinet appointments, but also to show that he is serious about addressing these demands, addressing corruption, addressing graft. Otherwise, I think this is going to go on for months. It will affect the economy. It will affect the perception of Kenya as a sort of stable place in the region, a stable place to visit. And I think he will have to navigate this very carefully.
Given Kenya's link with the US via Barack Obama, how has the Biden news landed there?
The Biden news has obviously been closely watched, I think, worldwide. Many people, I think, in Kenya have also been asking themselves why he decided to run and decided to pull out this late. But I have to say, right now, the papers are dominated by the news about the cabinet appointments and about the protests. Today, the Kenyan spokesman for the presidency, Isaac Mara, apologized to Kenyans for arrogance and opulence. And I think this is ultimately the subject that most people are interested in.
Finally, Navina, I know that you're actually in Paris. I could hear a French siren behind you there for the Olympics. Does Kenya have a big team? I understand it's a very strong showing.
Yes, it has a very, very strong showing. Kenya has a decent amount of runners, long-distance runners participating, but also for the first time, a fencer who will participate at the Olympics. And I think she's hoping to bring back a medal for Kenya in fencing, which would be a first.
Navina, thank you very much indeed, and good luck to your team. That's Navina Couture there, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. At the age of 34, Loic Blaise was a pilot of one of the last PBY Catalina flying boats still operational when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and he was obliged to hang up his wings. After years of therapy and training, he's since become the first aviator to have toured the world along the Arctic Circle and is about to take off again for a new world first by flying zero emissions. Juliet Linley sat down with Loic in our studio in Zurich to talk about his motivations and ambitions for the future.
For me, life on the ground made no sense. I'm sorry, it sounds a bit tough like that, but all my landmarks, yes, they are in the air. And I know how to behave in a plane, but on the ground I was quite useless. And it's even a bit religious. If you ask any diver, for example, it's completely addicting, that feeling when you're free in the free dimension, and there's something more than just technicity. When you reach to the skies, you need to be honest, you can't cheat with the plane. If there's no more fuel, there's no more fuel. It's a very fair environment.
So, a few years after your diagnosis, you become the first aviator to tour the world along the Arctic Circle.
Yes.
You teamed up with a Russian cosmonaut, Valery Tokarev, and you made that Arctic flight. How was that?
There's two sides to the coin. In one end, it was so good to be back in the air and to be back through the main door, Like a few years before, they said you will never fly again. And with that flight, not only I flew again, but I did something that no other pilot did before. It was like proving that being disabled is a very relative thing. So there was that, and the journey was marvelous. We've been to places. We flew in the last Terra Incognita in Chukotka, for example, where really nobody has ever been before. So I got the title of explorer, but for real, And that was the last land, the last Terra Incognita. So the whole travel was amazing, but on the same end, it was terrible because temperatures were alarming, like 20, 25 degrees more than the normals or average. We saw a landscape that's profoundly changing, and it's impacting the local economy, the ecosystems, the cultures. It's systemic, when you have one kind of violence, it creates others. And after the world tour, I got this beautiful medal of Adventurer of the Year just after my corn, so I was so proud. But the truth is I was so bitter, I was heartbroken from what I saw up there, and I thought you can't consider that a win. And I took a commitment and I said, look, I will not fly anymore until I can take off again with a really clean plane. And I had no idea how to do that.
Loic, from that moment of bitterness and heartbreak, despite the victory of being an adventurer of the year, you decided on a project called Plane B, and it involves flying with a plane with zero emissions.
Yes, you know, when you're going through difficulties, it's very important to keep your eyes on the horizon, like to have a project, a good reason to wake up and do something. It's like, you know, in life, like if you don't have desire, if you're not in love or ambitious about your job or whatever, you just don't wake up in the morning, you don't take a shower, and that's not what we want, right? We need to wake up, we need to get a shower and to get things done. So at that point, I was listening to the children. I was this whole Fluxcom thing, you know, and I was seeing some kids angry at planes. And I was like, no, that can't happen. Planes, they saved my life. They are not evil, man. And we need planes. We need planes for the firefighters, right? When a firefighter takes off to fight a plane in Australia, nobody's blaming him. It's like, whoa, thank you, man, for doing that. I think planes are very important because they allow people to travel and to transform. And on the other hand, yes, we need to do something about that. So I thought, okay, let's build a plane, but 100% clean one, and a plane that could be a message, a flying message. And I had no idea about how to do that. And so I started my way, and I want to tell that to kids, you know, don't forbid yourself from dreaming big, because even if it looks like impossible, once you start on a project, on an idea, you will meet the right people. If you're on the right path, you will meet the right people, the right engineers, the right artists, the right whatever you need, whoever you need, and you will be able to succeed. Just don't be scared of the journey. The journey is the most beautiful thing.
That was the adventurer Loic Blaise speaking to Juliette Linley in our Zurich studio. And talking of planes, the Farnborough Air Show, the international air show, which happens every 2 years, starts today. And our Andrew Muller is on his way there. We'll be getting regular updates over the next few days about that event. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk trade and economy news with Vicky Price, who's an economist and the former joint head of the UK government's economic service. Vicky, good morning to you. I understand you're in Athens. I hope you've got some aircon.
Absolutely, yes. It's been very, very hot here, I'm afraid. And of course, everyone's digesting all the news that's coming in about Biden, and people haven't quite sorted out in their heads, what it means exactly.
And what does it mean?
Protectionism and so on, yeah.
What does it mean for the markets?
Well, the markets so far have reacted, or rather have not reacted at all, really. So we looked at what happened in Asia. We're waiting, of course, for the European markets to open and then see what happens in the US. But for the moment, I think they're just digesting the news. But of course, there are differences and will be differences between various sectors, because we do know that, for example, looking at what, the chances may be in terms of Trump necessarily winning or not as a result of this change, because those are changing. People are reevaluating the implication for, let's say, what's going to happen to energy companies, what's going to happen to banks. If you look, for example, at anything to do with sort of renewables and electric vehicles, the expectation was that they would be doing worse under Trump. Maybe if the odds are now changing, that may change as well. So there is a little bit of that reevaluation that is already taking place and will probably intensify, but I think people will be calculating the odds again and seeing, who it might be, whether it is Kamala Harris, and how fast the actual transition, if you like, and the endorsement happens. And it will be, pretty bad if that takes longer, because that will add to a huge amount of volatility and insecurity. And I think for lots of countries in Europe, since I am in Greece, as you said, at the moment, I mean, the worry about Trump had always been, but of course we've seen that under Biden, protectionism. There's a certain element of that already, of course, with Biden, but with Trump it would become even bigger. And then, of course, what happens with Ukraine, the war, and so on, whether anything changes there too. So yes, I mean, it's going to dominate, I think, the next few months. But the markets so far are, I think, waiting and seeing.
Now, on Friday, the American cybersecurity company CrowdStrike became a household name for all of the wrong reasons after this botched software update caused havoc around the world with airports, with businesses, with banks and so on. Tell us about the fallout from that.
Well, yes, I mean, it seems to have affected, of course, not just, those sectors you mentioned, but really interesting that, the National Health Service in the UK and people being able to even have their prescriptions sort of issued, if you like, by doctors and pharmacists and so on. So it was much wider because, this has affected a wide range of industries and sectors. So that has put under the spotlight, I think, the dependence that we all have, A, on IT working properly, and B, on perhaps just one company, which is providing quite a lot of the sort of background for getting these things for Microsoft to work. And so CrowdStrike, which, as you rightly said, we'd never heard of before, suddenly, people who've invested in it have, and we've seen its share price go down as a result of all this, is, the one company that's dealing with those Microsoft updates. And doesn't seem to be a backup behind that. But of course, it's meant to also, work there for cybersecurity issues. And there is a big question mark now about what happens with any sort of insurance claims that may be made against things not working, your airline not being able to carry you from A to B, who actually is liable for this. And that is going to be something which I think the insurers are going to be looking at quite carefully and seeing whether they have to make lots of payouts or not. But for the moment, I think it has highlighted the fact that one needs a little bit more backup and that these things can happen at any time.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you say, the company has been popular with investors. Its stock had doubled in the past year before Friday's slump. But is this now going to push people perhaps to invest in their rivals?
Yes, well, assuming, of course, there are sufficient rivals. But what we've heard so far is that companies are saying we don't really have an awful lot of choice and we're still going to stick with them because they're rather good. And it was really an update that they were doing, which got a bug in it. And this is the reason why it all went wrong rather than anything major, which is, going on in the company that we need to really sort out. So that's basically where we are. And that it was a sort of technical fault in a way. What would really be worrying is if it was a serious cybersecurity threat that this company couldn't deal with, since that is really its strength. And that's the concern. And therefore, does one start looking for other options that might be out there and at least have doubling it up in a way in the future, have it doubled up in the future, so that you get yourself immune from this. But the reality is, and the unfortunate thing is that all these things cost. And how you sort of secure your operations is something which is probably going to be an increasing issue for anyone involved in this business.
Vicky, thank you very much indeed. That's Vicky Price there talking to us from Athens. And you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Well, to end the show, I'd like to return to our top story to get some sense of how Biden's decision not to run for president again is impacting the wider world. So I'm joined now by Monocle's foreign editor, Alexis Self. Good morning to you, Alexis.
Good morning, Georgina.
So the Washington Post has a big piece on how the world is reacting. What are the things that leap out at you?
Yeah, this is a kind of summary piece, and you see these a lot nowadays. International reaction to any big event, and I think it's pretty unanimous when you look at most leaders of the world releasing almost the obligatory kind of thanking message on social media to Joe Biden, emphasizing those things that they themselves were involved in with the president. I think, perhaps no one would be surprised that the only dissenting voice came from Moscow, and it actually wasn't that strongly negative. The Kremlin just said that they were focused on winning or rather achieving their goals in the special military operation in Ukraine, and that the US politics didn't really matter in all that. Though, of course, as I'm sure we can go into, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. But yeah, from Europe, from Asia, from Australasia, it's an outpouring of support and thanks to Joe Biden. And I think once we get past all of the controversy over Biden's refusal to concede what we now see was inevitable, for perhaps what was a hubristically long amount of time, I think he can really point to a legacy of really incredibly skilled diplomacy and foreign affairs management in a difficult environment for those kind of things.
Now, Israeli officials were amongst the first to offer their praise. President Isaac Herzog thanked Biden for his friendship and steadfast support. But of course, Biden has been turning against the war, and Benjamin Netanyahu is expected at the White House this week. He was invited by Republicans, and we were initially told that there was no way Biden would step down before that visit because it would look like he was handing a victory to Netanyahu. And I wonder, he has COVID, Biden has COVID. We don't even know if that meeting is going to take place. Yeah, and as you say, it's an inopportune moment for Netanyahu to be in Washington, given that he's clashed with Biden in recent months. But it's perhaps a sign of how unwavering US support is for Israel, that even these kind of quite guarded, and I think lots of Biden's opposition to what was going on in Gaza with the Israeli military operation, that they were leaked, and nothing actually was said much in the open. So, the press have made a lot of that, as have the Republicans. They've used it against Biden. But really, I think if you look back on the past few months since October the 7th, Biden's support for Ukraine has been pretty robust, actually, and US military supplies haven't stopped. So I don't think you can say that he's been anti-Israel in any way during his presidency, and especially not during his political career. He's visited Israel many times, and when he was a senator, has always been very, very robust in his support for Israel. You mentioned Russia earlier, and I guess defence-wise, this must be giving the US's so-called enemies pause for thought.
Yes, I think so. Although US allies will also be thinking about who is most likely to beat Donald Trump, given Trump's avowedly isolationist and kind of transactional way of conducting diplomacy, even with US's historic allies. So I think while there'll be a kind of mourning for that unequivocal support that the US will offer to the kind of the global security infrastructure, if you will, I think most leaders really secretly will be thinking, well, we want whoever's got the best chance of beating Donald Trump to prevail.
Alexis Self, thank you very much indeed. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Vincent McAviney, Laura Kramer and Tom Webb, our researcher Sana Jamani, and our studio manager Mariella Bevan, with editing assistance from Sarah Nichol and Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.